Stars have just been accepted as the best way to show how good something is. On Amazon, the best restaurants, hotels, movie posters, everyone uses stars as an indicator of quality. But this is somewhat strange. Stars are after all just a shape, and you could very well have been using triangles or smiley faces to rate something. But we've all agreed on stars. Well, why is this? The short answer is, stars were first used by early travel guide publishers like Baedeker and Murray. They published a series of books largely focused on Europe, but occasionally giving guides of the Middle East, North Africa and China. These you can still find online, and if you're interested in seeing how people travelled 100 years ago, I'd recommend them. But these guides only use stars to rate points of interest. For instance, Baedeker's 1873 Guide to Central Italy gave the Basilica of Constantine 1 star, while the Colosseum was given 2. As time went on, they gradually started reviewing hotels for the growing number of tourists, but there were already problems. Like at the beginning of Murray's travel guides, they wrote, "No attention can be paid to letters from innkeepers in praise of their own houses." So already, business owners saw the advantage of a positive review. But on the very same page, they also gave a warning to innkeepers saying, "The editors of the handbooks has learned from various quarters that a person or persons have been extorting money from innkeepers, tradespeople, artists and others on the continent, under pretext of procuring recommendations and favourable notices." He goes on to say that his writers do not accept money and the likes, but the image of an angry blogger and reviewer demanding free food for a good review is nothing new. Here you can see it was happening in the 1870s for instance. But although Murray started his travel guides in the 1830s, he took the rating system from someone else, Mariana Stark. She published travel guides in the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars for a growing tourism market. Before the Napoleonic Wars, tourism was largely the domain of rich young men who went on the grand tour throughout Europe. However, she spotted that there was a growing number of people travelling to the continent, in particular, people travelling with families. So she gave in-depth guides detailing prices, travel times and the likes. She also gave recommendations on where to stay as well. For instance, she said, "The most convenient way of visiting the continent is to go from London to Calais in a steam packet, and after resting one night at Calais, where Robert's Hotel is particularly comfortable." Plus, for those in a bit of a hurry, she also highlighted points of interest. But she didn't use stars, she used exclamation points. Her reviews on these points of interest were remarkably detailed as well. Not only did she recommend the Capitoline museums in Rome, but she also gave exclamation points for all the artwork inside. For instance, Juno as Queen of Heaven got 3 exclamation points. Why Murray switched from exclamation points to stars, it's a bit hard to tell. However, you can see in Murray's guides they were not stars as we use them today. They were more like an asterisk at this point. But it did set the basis for the different uses of stars to come, most of which were pioneered by guidebooks. For instance, there's the Michelin stars. And have you ever thought it was curious why a French tyre company decides which are the best restaurants in the world? Well, in 1900 there were just a couple thousand drivers in France, and they needed to increase this market. One way to do this was to promote restaurants way out of the cities in order to get people to buy cars to visit such places. So they began printing free maps and handed them out, and promoted rural restaurants, hotels and the likes. They, like Murray, quickly expanded and produced maps for Algeria, Tunisia, Portugal, and during World War I and II, these maps were used by both sides, as being some of the most up-to-date maps in Europe. Well, Michelin initially only used 1 star to show a worthy restaurant, but by the 1930s this had been increased to 3, and their criteria clearly shows their motives. 2 stars, for instance, was a place worth a detour, whereas 3 was worth a special journey. But once again, as they still are today, you can see that they were more like an asterisk than a star. Something very similar occurred with hotels. In 1958, the Mobile Petrol Company funded Forbes travel guides, and they began handing out stars to hotels based on their quality. And as it was funded by an oil company, you can see why they did this. Get tourists travelling around to the best hotels. So it had become established that stars, or at least asterisks, equals quality. So in the 1910s, Best American Stories began rating books by stars, and eventually movie reviewers and the likes followed suit. Yet there's somewhere else that stars denote quality, or at least rank, and that's the military. In the American Army, for instance, you could be a 3-star or a 5-star general, and this predates all of these travel guides. So Murray maybe just used an asterisk because it was an easy punctuation mark like the exclamation point, or he could well have copied off the military system. However, in the United States, stars weren't the obvious choice to show ranks, as General Washington had a different idea. He wrote, "As the Continental Army has unfortunately no uniform, and consequently many inconveniences must arise from not being able to distinguish the commissioned officers from the privates, it is desired that some badge of distinction be immediately provided. For instance, at the field, officers may have red or pink coloured cockades in their hats, the captains yellow or buff, and the subalterns green." So here he is saying that colourful cockades would be the better way to show rank. However, as you know, during the war he changed this to stars. 2 stars for a major general, and 1 star for a brigadier. Again, the reasoning behind this isn't set in stone, but it could have been taken from old chivalric orders of Europe, like the Order of Bath or the Order of the Garter. They most prominently had crosses, but stars were often shown around them, so granting a star to someone would have been a sign of rank, and this could have just been an evolution of that. Some other European chivalric orders clearly show how stars were associated with rank, like the Swedish Order of the Polar Star, which was created in 1748, or you also had the 14th century French Order of the Star, so this was already an established format. But another reason why the Americans could have chosen stars to show rank is because, after all, stars are shown on the American flag. But this just brings up another mystery. Why were stars used to represent states? And I can't come up with a concrete answer on this, so I'll give you a couple of theories. First of all, I should say that the 5-pointed star has always been around, as it's a remarkably easy design to make, so it's found in ancient Greece and Persia and in Egypt. But before America adopted their flag, it wasn't a popular symbol on flags or in general. Like, we can flick through the Derring Roll, a 13th century collection of coat of arms, and here you'll see squiggly lines, crescents, some things lifted straight from Game of Thrones, and a great deal more. That's not to say there were no stars, but even the crescent was more popular. And for those wondering, the crescent only really became an Islamic symbol centuries later, with the emergence of the Turkic Ottoman Empire. But now in the modern day, on the Chinese flag there's a large star representing the party, and the 4 smaller stars representing the social classes. St. Kitts and Nevis use stars to represent the islands, Venezuela show their original provinces, and there's many more. But these were all inspired by the Americans, and the Americans in turn could have been inspired by one coat of arms. That's the coat of arms of the Washington family in England, which uses 3 stars. Obviously George Washington was well aware of this, and the flag designers may well have been inspired to adopt his family's symbols. Yet it would be quite interesting to know, had he come from the Hussey family, that the Americans would be using legs to represent states. Or there's another possible origin, and that lies in Switzerland, in the canton of Valais. This was an early republic which used stars on their flag. Initially they seemed to change for no reason at all between how many stars they'd use, or how many points the stars had. For instance, in the middle of the 16th century they had 10 stars of different sizes. But by the middle of the 18th century, the republic, which was called the Republic of the Seven Tithings, used 7 stars to represent the 7 states. Also, as well as using 7 stars more often, they also began to use the 5-pointed star more regularly. This change as well happened just before the American Revolution, so maybe the Americans were inspired to copy this early republic's use of stars, or they could well have copied the coat of arms of the Washington family in England, or do you have a better suggestion? As always, I think vexillology is one of the most poorly researched branches of history, so I'm always happy to see if someone has a better suggestion. Let me know in the comments below. Plus, this is a sort of new series I'm trying out, finding out the reasons why we do many of the things we do today. So if you have any questions you need answering, leave it in the comments below. And I just want to say thank you to my patrons who have stood by me for so long, like Joshua Gores, Tad586, Nate M, Kovrig Theodore, Daniel Beline, Jefferson Yates, John Paul Ferguson, Krish, Large Doubloon 73, Patrick Hugh, Anna Sevi, Andreas, Brett Cowie, Kelso Azevedo, Comrade, David Harrison, Matthew Doyle, Robert Conley, Spencer Polio, Cap, Matthew Calland, and Mike DeCarno. And if you would like to join on Patreon, I am releasing some exclusive videos on there, so you can always sign up and support this channel. But again, thank you to the patrons who have stood by me for so long. I really appreciate it.